At 6, a day of drama for Downing Street as the Prime Minister fights off more calls to resign. At a rowdy Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson defended his record in office.
We have more people in employment and more employees on the payroll now than there were before the pandemic began. That is what my staff have been working on in Downing Street.
Doesn't the country deserve so much better than this out of touch, out of control, out of ideas, and soon to be out of office Prime Minister?
Pressure intensified as a Tory MP defected to Labour and a former cabinet minister delivered his verdict on Boris Johnson.
You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
But as some Tory MPs rally around the Prime Minister tonight, we'll be trying to gauge the level of threat to his premiership. Also on the programme. England's Plan B COVID measures are being dropped completely. Work from home ends today. Face coverings are no longer required from the end of next week.
This is a regular customer.
And inflation soars to its highest level in almost 30 years, driven by rising food prices and energy bills, and there are warnings of worse to come.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News Channel, after last night's drama, England prepare to face Australia again in the final of netball's quad series at London's Copper Box.
Good evening from Downing Street on a dramatic day in Westminster as the Prime Minister faced more intense pressure over parties held here during lockdown. For the second week in a row, Boris Johnson heard calls for his resignation at Prime Minister's questions, among them from a former Conservative cabinet member, David Davis, who said, "In the name of God, go." And moments before the Prime Minister stood up in Parliament, one of his own MPs announced he was defecting to Labour. Boris Johnson again apologised for any misjudgments and told the Commons that MPs should wait for the results of an inquiry into the allegations, which is expected next week. Here's our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg.
The atmosphere in the Prime Minister's neighbourhood is full of risk. Danger dangles all around for Boris Johnson. Uncertainty hanging in the air. Downing Street confronting the truth that some of his own MPs want him gone. As ministers gathered to agree to ditch some COVID rules this morning, some of his own side waiting and watching, thinking about ditching him.
Is it under control, Chief Whip?
Yeah, all is calm.
All is calm. Do you think you might be in denial about that, if you think this is calm?
I think we need to focus on looking after the country and dealing with COVID and making sure we've got that right.
But can it really go on like this? Some of your MPs are putting letters in.
Is it all over for the Prime Minister, do you think? Ridiculous.
It is not perhaps ridiculous, despite his allies' claim, to suggest their boss could be gone before too long. It was no ordinary Wednesday. Pressure on Boris Johnson after weeks of claims about what went on in Number 10 during lockdown. 20 MPs who discussed sending letters of no confidence in their leader. Then a shock. Political chat interrupted.
Hearing Christian Wakeford, the Bury MP, is defecting to the Labour Party.
A huge surprise for his colleagues and the rest.
That is quite incredible.
The first Tory MP since 2007, Christian Wakeford, cheered to the rafters in the Commons as he defected and took a seat for Labour instead.
Can I start by warmly welcoming the Honourable Member for Bury South to his new place and to the Parliamentary Labour Party. Mr Speaker, like so many people up and down the country, he has concluded that the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves.
A sting from Keir Starmer at a vulnerable moment for Boris Johnson.
And as for Bury South, Mr Speaker, as for Bury South, let me say to...
In a Union Jack mask, the new Labour MP opposite, not behind the Prime Minister this time.
We will win again in Bury South at the next election under this Prime Minister.
There was more energy from the Prime Minister today in a chaotic Prime Minister's questions. as he sought to stand and fight, mocked by the Labour leader.
Doesn't the country deserve so much better than this out of touch, out of control, out of ideas, and soon to be out of office Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, when the history of this pandemic comes to be written, and the history of the Labour Party comes to be written, and believe me, they are history and will remain history, Mr. Speaker, it will show that we delivered while they dithered, and we vaccinated while they vacillated, Mr. Speaker.
Then just when he thought he might have got through without a new wound, a brutal blast from his own side. A prominent Tory quoting Cromwell to try to oust the leader of the Tories' 21st century revolution.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation: "You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go."
David Davis and Boris Johnson used to be allies of a sort. What a day, you hear the Speaker aghast.
What a day.
What else to say?
Hi, good to see you again.
So a senior Tory, the latest to call for the Prime Minister's exit. The smiling Labour leader welcoming a Conservative to his fold. Yet there have been more public efforts from Conservatives to get out and defend.
Well, he is the bounce-back king. I've always supported Boris, and I wouldn't be an MP here if it wasn't for him.
MPs and ministers who want Boris Johnson to stay have been falling over themselves to call for cool heads all round. One loyal cabinet minister even claimed the threat to Boris Johnson wasn't real. It is true to say no one can be sure in a secret process how many Conservative MPs are really willing to try to oust him. Yet today's chaos demonstrates clearly there are members of different Tory tribes who want to see him gone.
Mr Cummings, are you going to provide Sue Gray with evidence that Boris Johnson lied?
The Prime Minister's always had political detractors and has gathered enemies along the way. He may not want to rest until this is over. And Tory tradition shows when the party concludes the leader's out of line, they are removed. But only 2 years after a huge election victory, Boris Johnson will resist attempts for a changing of the guard.
And Laura joins me now. Certainly a day of high drama and some unexpected moments.
That's right, Sophie. 2 big surprises for this place and a very, very uneasy mood around here. First off, the call from David Davis, the former cabinet minister, fellow Brexit traveller of Boris Johnson. A very dramatic and clear indication from a senior figure calling on Boris Johnson to go. That's not something anyone was expecting earlier this morning. And then this defection, a Conservative crossing the floor politically and physically in the House of Commons to go and sit with the Labour Party. We haven't seen that for a very long time. And on the one hand, a shock like that, a nasty surprise, is the last thing that Downing Street needs, except that some MPs feel that that is such a betrayal that in the afternoon we've actually seen some Conservative MPs feeling that perhaps they ought to be rallying round Boris Johnson a little bit more to protect the Conservative Party. But there is no question that there is no sense of peace and calm around. This is still a very perilous and tricky period for the Prime Minister.
Laura, more from you later on, but for now, thank you. Well, Boris Johnson has announced that England's Plan B measures are being dropped completely. From today, the government is no longer asking people to work from home. From tomorrow, secondary school pupils in England will no longer have to wear face coverings in the classroom. And for everyone else, from next Thursday, face coverings will no longer be required by law, though you will still be advised to wear one in enclosed and crowded spaces. Also from next Thursday, a COVID pass will no longer be required to go to nightclubs and large events. But the self-isolation regulations remain in place for now for those who test positive, though they could be phased out by the end of March. Well, tonight, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, said the latest data showed the Omicron variant was in retreat. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Masks on and off. The rules have changed at various times over the last 2 years, but in England the government has said they'll no longer be compulsory in shops and on public transport. The Prime Minister said masks would still be advisable in some settings, but it was now down to personal choice.
We will trust the judgment of the British people and no longer criminalise anyone who chooses not to wear one.
Labour said they supported the easing of Plan B as long as it was backed up by the science. In Bristol, people gave us their reaction.
Well, I reckon it's a good thing that we're now learning to live with the Omicron variant, and that we've got to have the restrictions removed little by little.
For me and for my family, I have elderly parents. I just would rather if we could keep the mask wearing, really.
At this restaurant, they welcomed the scrapping of work from home guidance.
So for us, it's been great. The offices being back is amazing. Hopefully we're going to be back trading on a weekly basis, as it's been very, very quiet for us.
So what is the trend now for COVID cases? One of the most authoritative sources is the Community Infection Survey by the Office for National Statistics, which picks up those without symptoms. According to the ONS, COVID infections in the UK fell last week for the first time since late November. It's estimated 3.4 million people had the virus. Infections came down in much of the UK, including in England, where 1 in 20 people had the virus, and in Wales with 1 in 25, and Scotland 1 in 20. But in Northern Ireland, also with 1 in 20, the trend was said to be uncertain. And the head of the ONS thinks this is a significant moment.
We're certainly seeing a major turning point, and we're certainly seeing a real reduction. The question I ask is that we're not sure yet whether that's going to continue to go down.
I raised the issue at the Downing Street briefing.
While we believe that overall we will continue to see declines in cases, that may plateau at some points as the infection is in various different populations. It's very hard to see beyond 2 to 3 weeks, and clearly the biggest change that's going to happen is people's behaviour.
At this hospital in Walsall, the number of COVID patients in intensive care has come down a bit since last week, but doctors are urging the public to remain cautious as restrictions are eased.
We're not in a bad place currently, but dropping our guard at this point is probably not the right choice or right answer. We probably will need to be vigilant and make sure that we follow the precautions that have been put in place by the government.
In Scotland, mandatory mask wearing will continue in most indoor public spaces, though most other restrictions will be lifted from Monday. In Wales, nightclubs can reopen at the end of next week, though they'll remain closed for now in Northern Ireland. The devolved nations are moving at differing speeds, charting their own courses through this stage of the pandemic.
And Hugh joins me now. So, Hugh, the scientists agree with this decision?
Well, Sophie, I think broadly, yes, with obviously quite a few caveats there. The daily reported cases have been falling fairly consistently now, but there's been debate about how accurately they reflect what's really going on. They only pick up people who've come forward for testing. And of course, the rules have changed. You don't need a confirmatory PCR if you've tested positive on a lateral flow. The ONS survey, as we've been hearing, is a much broader reflection because it picks up people who don't even know they've got the virus because they don't have symptoms. And as we heard, a quite significant turning point has been spotted by the ONS last week, with cases now falling pretty much in most parts of the UK. Well, that's cases. Hospital admissions in England, yes, they're coming down a bit, but not hugely. There's still pressure on the NHS. And as Dr. Susan Hopkins of the UK Health Security Agency has been saying, it's hard to see beyond the next few weeks. So much will depend on people's behaviour, how they respond to advice on mask wearing rather than compulsion, and how they respond to moves back to work. A lot of it's now down to the public.
Hugh Pym, thank you. Well, the latest figures show there has been a slight increase in the number of people testing positive for coronavirus, with 108,069 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, just over 93,000 new cases were reported per day in the last week. The number of people in hospital has fallen slightly, with just under 19,000 yesterday, and the number of people seriously ill on ventilators has also fallen slightly. There were 359 deaths reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, though there will be some amongst this number who won't have died from COVID. On average, in the past week, 266 deaths were announced every day. On vaccinations, over 36.5 million people have now had a booster jab, which means nearly 64% of people aged 12 and over have now had 3 vaccine doses. Prices have risen at their fastest rate in almost 30 years. Inflation climbed to 5.4% in December. It has been driven up by the soaring cost of food and energy, amongst other things. The figure is more than double the Bank of England's target for inflation. The last time inflation was higher was in March 1992, when it was 7.1%. And with gas and electricity prices expected to rise sharply in the coming months, experts are warning there is much worse to come. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has more.
Up go the prices. This independent food retailer in Ashford in Kent has to move rapidly to keep up.
Every week when I get my invoice, I check it against my price list. Oh, need to put that up because, you know, the cost has gone up, and some of them go up in between the catalogue being published every other month to the invoice coming through. Just tick these off.
As a supplier of locally produced food, but also as consumers and parents, today's figure reflects the very real experience for the likes of Katie.
The price of everything's gone up. You have to make decisions as to what luxuries you then want. It's not, you know, we haven't been on holiday not just because of a global pandemic, but maybe because we can't afford it either. You know, there's various different reasons why, and I think it's all come in to a head all at once.
40 miles to the north is the Isle of Grain, where goods, electricity and gas enter the country from around the world, and where the UK is importing energy at record high prices. It's been these energy costs that have pushed inflation so high, but in December that spread to food prices, pushing the main measure up to 5.4%, the highest level for 3 decades, well over the 2% target for inflation set for the Bank of England. And forecasters fear that overall inflation could go as high as 7% in the spring. That can be seen in this increasingly common sight, a tanker of frozen liquid American gas unloading a third of daily British demand in Kent. Tankers such as this that have come from Texas are only here in record numbers in Europe and the UK because of the record prices your energy companies and power companies have paid for that gas that normally goes to the Far East. It means that there's an inevitable, inescapable impact on consumer bills and potentially for the taxpayer. The only question is when this is paid for and whether this will lead to a further round of price rises and higher inflation. The inflation rate shooting up means that some bills pegged to these figures, such as mobile phone, broadband and some rail fares, will automatically go up too. All of that is putting pressure on company bosses like here at this high-end radiator factory in Birmingham to raise wages for his workers.
We've paid them a winter fuel allowance off our own backs because we recognise we don't want them to be worrying about how they're going to keep the heating on, you know, particularly for a business like ours, which is about heating.
Yeah.
So we've done that with them, but I could see that they are going to have to start coming back to us and looking for more money. Of course they are. Cost of living is going up.
You're seeing the spiral coming.
Absolutely. Here comes the spiral. Those discussions are taking place.
But that's going
now.
to increase prices again.
Of course it is. So we've had 3 price increases. We've been forced to put our prices up 3 times.
The Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey expressed very great concern today about the crisis in Ukraine prolonging the energy shock. More inflation is already in the pipe, and not now just in our radiators. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is on a visit to Ukraine, has warned that Russia could launch an attack on Ukraine at very short notice. Russia has around 100,000 troops massed on its borders. Moscow has denied it's planning a military invasion. The US Secretary of State has urged President Putin to choose a peaceful path. America has also confirmed an extra $200 million in defence aid for Ukraine. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams has more.
British military equipment arriving in Ukraine, short-range anti-tank missiles with a small team of trainers to follow. The latest Western gesture of support to a country facing a mounting threat from Russia. Diplomatic support too. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken flew to Kiev this morning, promising relentless American efforts to prevent Russia from invading. Washington's message to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky: there will be no talks about you without your involvement.
The United States wants you to know this. As you stand up to efforts to divide, to intimidate, to threaten, the United States stands with you resolutely in your right to make decisions for your own future, to shape that future as Ukrainians for Ukraine.
And all the while, Russian troops maintain their menacing presence on Ukraine's northern and eastern borders. Now in neighbouring Belarus too, preparing for what are called joint military drills. American officials say these could be used as a cover for an invasion of Ukraine. Kiev says it has what it takes to withstand an attack.
We have 261,000 in our Ukrainian army. We have the options to have territorial defending forces 130,000. We have 400,000 veterans of Ukrainian-Russian war. So I'm sure that we have a capacity to deter this activity from Moscow.
Last week we saw a diplomatic trail that crisscrossed Europe from Geneva to Brussels and Vienna. At the end of it, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov appeared to throw in the towel. Our patience, he said, is at an end. But here we are, 4 days on, and the process is actually shifting up a gear. Mr. Lavrov and Antony Blinken are due to meet on Friday, once again in Geneva. The talking, it seems, is not quite over. But the tremors of this crisis are being felt right across Europe. On the Baltic island of Gotland, Sweden is beefing up its presence, concerned about nearby Russian activity and what it calls Russia's direct threat to Europe's security. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Let's take a look at some of today's other news stories now. And international aid efforts have been stepped up in Tonga after the scale of damage caused by the volcanic eruption and tsunami was revealed. New pictures show the islands covered in a layer of volcanic ash, while in coastal areas waves tore down trees and ripped through buildings. International telephone links have now been restored and ships carrying aid are expected to arrive by Friday. A Belgian court has sentenced a Vietnamese man to 15 years in jail after ruling he was the ringleader in the trafficking of 39 migrants found dead in a lorry in the UK. The victims, all Vietnamese, were discovered on an industrial estate in Essex in 2019. Vo Van Hong was found guilty of having led a cross-channel people trafficking operation based in Belgium. A second man in his 30s has been arrested by Irish police investigating the murder of Aisling Murphy. The 23-year-old primary school teacher was attacked while out exercising beside a canal in Tullamore in County Offaly last Wednesday. The man is being questioned in relation to the potential withholding of information. The person arrested yesterday, also in his 30s, continues to be questioned on suspicion of murder. Back to our main story now, and the Prime Minister facing more calls to resign today. A lot of focus in the past 24 hours has been on the Tory backbenchers in the so-called red wall seats, where until 2 years ago voters had always supported Labour. That all changed in 2019 when they suddenly switched to the Tories. Our North of England correspondent Fiona Trott has been speaking to voters in one such seat, Bishop Auckland, which went blue for the first time at the last election.
A town where Westminster feels a million miles away. In Bishop Auckland, people just want investment and jobs. It's why they voted for change. And today, over cake and coffee, politics was the talk of the tea room.
Standing up in the Houses of Parliament and say he doesn't know anything about it.
Voters weighing up their options once again.
I won't be doing it again, even if I just vote for the dog down the road. Simple as that. But I won't be voting for Boris Johnson, yeah.
I'm thoroughly sick of hearing about it. I would rather to hear them telling me what they're going to do about now and about our future.
It's not just Bishop. I think there's a really massive amount of poverty going on at the moment, and everyone is struggling, and rather than highlighting poverty and other stuff that's going on because of all the budget cuts. It just seems to be about Boris and the party.
A lot of people around here took a risk and voted against what they would traditionally have voted against or voted for, you know, and they feel now that they took that chance and they've just had their noses rubbed in it.
Bishop Auckland is a symbol of Boris Johnson's victory at the last election, a former mining town held by Labour since the 1930s. Today, those voters seem more divided. There are people who feel he's let them down and businesses who still back the leader, who promised more investment. Shop owners like Suzanne, who opened up just before Christmas.
I think you should just give them a chance, see how things go. It's getting the shops open. That's the problem, and we can't get the customers down if the shops aren't open. So that's the main thing what we need to prioritise around here.
And the support that we've been offered through the whole of lockdown is we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. So as a business person, yes. Personally, some of the things that I've had to go through personally in my life of it, I'd probably say no, I think he should step down from it.
In this corner of England, they're wondering if their hopes can still be tied to a man who's fighting for his own future. Fiona Trott, BBC News, Bishop Auckland.
Well, let's get a last word from our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. So, what now?
Well, it's very difficult to tell, Sophie, but there's no question it's very, very difficult right now for Downing Street. They're not in control of events, and that, for any government, is a significant problem because it's not just that it's hard for them to know whether or not Boris Johnson is going to survive, but it also means it's very difficult for them to get anything else done at all. And viewers will remember how this all started, allegations about what was going on behind closed doors during the pandemic that upset so many of the public and so many MPs too because of the whiff of double standards, but also for MPs, crucially, about how Boris Johnson has handled the events. And it's that really which is seen by many MPs as having been a mistake that is at the root of the concern here. It's not necessarily always what happened, but actually about how Downing Street have been handling things. There's a very uneasy limbo, though. Quite a lot of MPs and ministers still reserving judgment until the official inquiry into exactly what happened done by the senior official Sue Gray emerges. That now probably won't happen until the beginning of next week. But a lot still could change in the next few days. Boris Johnson seemed today to have more fight about him, but number 10 certainly right now can't afford any more nasty surprises.
Our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, thank you. Let's have a look at the latest weather now with Chris Fawkes.
Thanks, Sophie. Although much of the day across England and Wales we had a lot of clouds and patchy outbreaks of rain, it was a fine end to the day on the south coast as that cloud cleared out of the way. But different story for northern Scotland, where it's been a windy day and we've had some snow showers in Shetland. Indeed, as colder air has actually fed in behind this weather front, we're starting just to see the first signs of the showers across the north of mainland Scotland, particularly North Highland, start to turn to sleet. And overnight tonight, as the colder air continues to dig in, we'll see some snow showers pushing into the north of mainland Scotland. The main risk is icy stretches, although there could be a dusting of snow in places. A few showers coming down the North Sea coast as well. For most of us, though, it's just a cold night with clear starry skies and a widespread and fairly sharp frost. A cold start then to Thursday, and Thursday looks to be the coldest day of the week. For most of us, sparkling sunshine from dawn till dusk, but there will be a few showers. Northern Scotland, the showers here quickly turning back to rain and sleet as milder air works in, and a few showers are possible around some of our North Sea coast. However, for the most part, the wind's just about offshore, keeping most of them out to sea. Norfolk will have the highest risk of seeing frequent showers, and it will be a cold day, temperatures 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. Now, high pressure is still in charge through Friday and the weekend, but the air is going to start recirculating around our area of high pressure, with the mildest air actually pushing into the north and west of the UK. Here for Scotland, Northern Ireland, probably parts of northwest England and Wales, there'll be a lot of cloud, a few mist and hill fog patches around, and maybe occasional spots of drizzle. Still, for most, it's dry. Temperatures could reach 9 or 10 for western Scotland, but it's quite chilly for most in England and Wales, with temperatures still at around 5s and 6s after a sharp frost. Beyond that, well, into the weekend, well, even into next week, the high pressure is going to be with us. There are no great changes in the forecast. If anything, the temperatures will just creep up to average or a little bit above. For example, Edinburgh sees temperatures this time of year should be about 7, so 9 or 10 degrees Celsius is above average, but the weather will stay dry for most of the weekend and most of next week as well. That's the latest weather. Sophie.
Chris, thank you very much. And that is all from the BBC News at 6 on a dramatic day here at Westminster. Hugh will be here with all the latest at 10, but it's goodbye from me on BBC One. We can now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.